Hey friends! My name is Desiree, aka Mama Friendly, and I do all sorts of videos on my channel, from cooking videos to planner videos, vlogs, hauls, homeschool videos with a Disney twist, a little bit of everything. So if any of that sounds like fun to you, I hope that you'll subscribe and join me on my YouTube adventure. Speaking of a Disney twist, this video is a collab hosted by Tiffany at Small Town 6. She challenges us every month to cook with a different theme or ingredient, and this month she wanted us to cook with either apples or pumpkins. The reason I say Disney twist is because, of course, I'm taking this as an opportunity to share a Disney copycat recipe, which I've been doing on my channel every month this year. The difference is that I'm doing them with an allergy-friendly spin because I have gluten and dairy allergies, and so I can't just have these treats at the parks, so I want to try to make them in a way where I can enjoy them in the comfort of my home. Don't worry, if you don't have allergies, I'm also explaining the authentic, true-to-the-park recipe so that you can recreate them at home yourself, just like you'd find them at the parks. And as you can see, there's a little bit of a casual vibe going on here. My hair's up, like the whole thing. I'm not even sitting down, which I usually do for these videos. It kind of fits the energy of the rest of the video. I'm making Disneyland's famous pumpkin fudge. I am not a candy maker. I typically avoid making candy because it is so precise, it is such a science, and I tend to wing things. That doesn't work when you're doing things like cooking with sugar. Now, this video is a little longer than I'd like, probably because I had to make this recipe twice. The original recipe I found was a complete fail, and it turns out that even the person that wrote the recipe later on said, whoops, my bad, this recipe doesn't work. Wish I'd seen that beforehand, but I went on Instagram, I went on my vlog, and I asked you all, should I include both the not great recipe and the successful one, like show the entire trial and error process, or should I just show you the recipe that worked? And every single vote I received overwhelmingly said, show us the whole process. So I'm not gonna show you every little bit of the first attempt because at the end of the day, the recipe didn't work anyways, but I am gonna kind of show you what led to me trying it out a second time in the first place. I will say, the second one, mwah, amazing, perfect, delicious, and I will definitely be making it again. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you what didn't work the first time so that you could take that into account when you're seeing the second recipe and you don't make the same mistakes I made. Remember, this is a collab, and that means that there's a playlist. So in the description box, you're gonna see lots of links, but one of them in particular is Tiffany's channel, and the other one is the playlist, so that once you've seen what I made, you could check out what all my friends made for their apple and pumpkin challenge this month. Let's jump right into the recipes, shall we? All right, pals, so we've got all of our ingredients here for our Disney pumpkin fudge. We're gonna start with 1.5 cups of granulated sugar. Yes, this is where I keep my sugar. We also need 1.5 cups of packed light brown sugar. So that means when you're measuring, make sure you're like really packing it in there so that you get the correct amount. You don't want it loosely in your measuring cup. You need 1.5 sticks of butter. I'm using this vegan butter, which I really enjoy baking with. For reference, 1.5 sticks is 6 ounces. So a stick of butter is typically 4 ounces, 1.5 would be 6. I have 8 here, so I'm gonna be using 1.5 sticks of this. We need 2/3 of a cup of pureed pumpkin. Remember, that's actual pure pumpkin, not pumpkin pie filling. So 2/3 of a cup from this can, and I will use the rest probably to make some dairy-free pumpkin spice lattes. If you want to see how I make that, I'll post the recipe in the corner, and I'll also have it linked in the description box below. The recipe calls for a teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of cloves, but I've got my handy-dandy pumpkin pie spice blend here, so that's what I'm going to use. 2 cups of white chocolate chips. This is the Enjoy Life brand. This is the only white chocolate chips I've found that are gluten and dairy free and not costing an arm and a leg. So I'm gonna use this whole bag, and I do have some more in the fridge, however much I need to make up the 2 cups worth. Then we're gonna need a 1/2 pound or 8 ounces of marshmallows. Now, I'm not worried about vegan specifically. I'm worried about dairy-free. Marshmallows typically have gelatin in them, which makes them not vegan. They do sell vegan marshmallows. I think Dandy's in particular is one brand at Whole Foods and on Amazon. So I'll have those linked below in case vegan is a consideration that you want to make. Since I'm not worried about the gelatin, I'm using just these regular marshmallows. And lastly, we're going to need 3 tablespoons of maple syrup. As for our hardware, it says to use a 12 by 8 inch baking dish. I have a 9 by 13, so it's going to have to do. I feel like 12 by 18 is kind of an odd shape and size. Maybe I'm wrong, but I've got this here and I'm going to line it. It says to line it with foil, but I don't keep aluminum foil in the house really. So I'm going to do my best to line it with parchment paper. I'm going to probably rip the seams on the corners to try to get as tight a fit as possible. I'm also breaking out the candy thermometer because we are going to need to get our mixture up to a soft ball stage, which is 235 degrees Fahrenheit roughly. So even though this is no bake, we are going to need specific temperature for our sugar mixture. Focus, please. So I'm going to have this exact one linked down below as well in case you don't have a candy thermometer and you'd like to get one for the recipe. So while I'm setting up for the recipe, we've just hit a little snag. I'm looking at the list of ingredients, and I'm going to have this original recipe linked down below as well. But the list of ingredients only lists these things. However, when you go into the actual method, it says, in a large saucepan, whisk together the butter, evaporated milk, pumpkin spices, and sugar. So I don't know how much evaporated milk I need. And when I look in the comments, the original poster of the recipe said, my bad, I know that I didn't put the measurements. I'm going to delete this entire recipe. But that was like years ago. And not only did she never update the measurements, but she also never deleted the recipe. So I feel like I'm all in now. And I kind of have to just go ahead and do this. I don't have evaporated milk, but I do have my handy dandy nut pods. Now, I genuinely don't know how much of this I'm gonna need because I wasn't planning to use it, but it's here, so I guess, I don't know, I guess I'll go with like maybe 6 ounces, so 3/4 of a cup. I'm trying to think what sorts of measurements cans of evaporated milk come in. Yeah, apparently they typically come in 12-ounce cans, so I'm gonna go with 6 ounces, which would be the equivalent of half a can. This is apparently now completely an experiment. It might work, it might not, so hang on to your hats, guys, because we're going to find out together how this is going to go. Okay, so I've got my saucepan here. Everything is on medium, high-ish heat. So I'm going to do my butter first. Remember, we're doing 6 ounces of butter. So I'm kind of leaning towards not using the milk at all because before the element of the milk even got introduced to me, the recipe made more sense, especially if we're using like a candy thermometer, so we're obviously trying to make some sort of a candy situation here. I don't know how milk fits into that. So I guess we'll see what I end up doing. I'm kind of playing it by ear right now. So the ingredients, or the recipe, says to do your butter, evaporated milk, I guess if you're using it, your 2/3 of a cup of pumpkin puree, your spices, and both your sugars. So that's a 1.5 cups of granulated sugar and a 1.5 cups of packed light brown sugar into the saucepan. Bring it to a boil. It will melt quickly. So I'm gonna set myself up to do that. I'm gonna leave the milk out for now and just kind of take a look at it and see how it, I don't know, see how it looks and kind of go from there. Okay, yeah, this is the whole mixture but without any milk. And honestly, it still seems quite runny. The butter's not melty yet, but it seems quite runny. And it says that I'm meant to boil it until it reaches 235 Fahrenheit on the candy thermometer. So I think I'm just gonna leave it be because I feel like if I add more liquid to this, all that's gonna do is just make it take longer to get to that point. So yeah, fully an experiment. Happy you guys are coming along. Okay, we're at 235 Fahrenheit. This literally took 5 minutes, like exactly 5 minutes, I think. So it says that at this point we're gonna mix in our white chocolate chips. I gotta tell you guys, I am terrified of cooking sugar this way, so I'm gonna be extremely careful when pouring in my chocolate chips. I've got the 2 cups right over here. I'm gonna pour them in slowly. I turned the heat down. The recipe doesn't say to, but I am very scared of what happens next. So we're doing that. We're gonna stir these in. Oh my gosh. Okay, very nice. I might have needed a bigger pot, to be honest, but decisions were made, so we're just gonna ride with it. It's already starting to look more viscous and candy-like after I've thrown that in there, so we've got that going. Now once this is well mixed, I'm gonna throw in my marshmallows. I'm not actually throwing anything. It's a matter of it's a turn of phrase, if you will. So I'm gonna put in my 8 ounces of marshmallows. I'm basically just gonna eyeball it. The bag I have is 10.5 ounces and I need 8, so I'm gonna just pretty much use most of the bag. Yeah, see, this is already getting nice and thick. This looks like I think a fudge mixture probably should, so I'm glad I did not go with that extra milk. Now I'm gonna put in my marshmallows and I'm gonna put in my 3 tablespoons of maple syrup, and at that point this is going to be ready to put into our lined baking dish. At this point I've turned the heat down to medium. The recipe does not specify if it needs to be on the heat, if I could take it off the heat entirely. I probably am going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and turn the heat off altogether. If I were using a bigger saucepan, I might not be as worried, but I am concerned at this point about overflow. It just says that it might look clumpy, but to keep mixing until it's mixed, until it's thoroughly mixed. And at that point, we're going to pour it into our baking dish. Once it's in our pan, we're meant to let it cool for at least 2 hours. It does not say refrigerate, it just says let it cool. So I'm going to do that on the countertop. I'm going to give it its 2 hours, and then we're going to come back and inspect our work. Once it's cooled, you should be able to cut it into 1-inch squares to be served. So one thing I want to note is that, remember, I'm using a 13x9 pan or dish, and the recipe called for a 12x8, so smaller than the one I'm using. I could barely fit the mixture into this pan. So I think it would be prudent to go for something slightly larger than you think you need over something smaller, because the marshmallows really made this puff up a lot. And so, yeah. That being said, I'm also going to allow this 3 hours. The recipe calls for 2, but the recipe is proving to be, well, not super reliable. So I'm gonna give it 3 entire hours before I even look at it again, because it's looking very liquidy, very runny. I'm sure that the marshmallows cooling down is gonna be a huge part of what eventually, hopefully, makes this a fudgy texture. That remains to be seen, but it's a lot more mixture than I was expecting. It's a lot thicker than I was expecting, especially considering I am using a larger than called for dish. So I think 3 hours is a good estimate of, you know, I'm not gonna mess with it before then, because I genuinely don't think 2 hours from now that this is gonna be cooled enough, solid enough, etc. to cut and serve. So we will find out together. 3 hours later, and this is definitely not sliceable. So I'm gonna put this in the refrigerator and hope for the best. It tastes good, but it's most certainly not fudge. It's the day after attempt number 1. This has been chilling in the fridge for, let's say 18 hours. And I'm trying my best to cut it out here so we could do a texture check. Okay, so pretty much the top bit I would say is quite fudgy, but then the bottom layer is just this stretchy mess. And yeah, I would not serve that to anyone or gift that to anyone and call it fudge. It still tastes really good, but it's not quote-unquote fudge. So I don't want to throw all this out. If you have any ideas or suggestions for what I could do with this, let me know. Because it's Wednesday right now and you're watching this on Friday. So I'm just going to leave it covered in the fridge for a couple days. And hopefully you guys have some good suggestions for me so I don't have to just toss the whole thing. That being said, I am going to attempt this a second time. So I had to go and get more ingredients. I had to get the regular Enjoy Life chocolate chips. So this is supposed to be white chocolate, but the white chocolate is for some reason a specialty item. You can't just get it in a store. You have to order it directly from Enjoy Life, or you have to spend $50 on like a 6-pack on Amazon, and that wouldn't have come on time anyways. So I have regular chocolate here. The color of the final product might be off a bit, but I just want to see if the recipe is even worth recreating. So this is going to be attempt number 2 with a slightly different recipe. This recipe is more detailed though, so I'm hoping that it works out. So we're going to need 3/4 of a cup of butter. Again, that's 6 ounces of butter. So that's what, like 3/4 of a stick maybe, or a stick and a half? It's a stick and a half. Remember from yesterday. Whatever I said yesterday, that's how much we need today. We need 2 cups of sugar. So regular white sugar. We have 3/4 of a cup of packed brown sugar. The recipe calls for 2/3 of a cup of evaporated milk. I don't have non-dairy evaporated milk. I don't know if that's even a thing. So I'm going to use 2/3 of a cup of the original nut pods, which is what I use whenever I cook or bake anything that requires milk. 1/2 cup of canned pumpkin. This should be enough, but if it's not, I have a second can here. We need a teaspoon of ground cinnamon and a 1/2 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice. 1 package of the chocolate chips. White chocolate would have been preferred, but like I said, we're going with what we've got. A 7-ounce jar of marshmallow cream. So we're not using actual marshmallows this time, we're using marshmallow cream. And 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Something that's already a little different is that the recipe is telling me to go ahead and line a 13 by 9. Remember yesterday's recipe said to use a 12 by 8. So we've got our 13 by 9 pan. I'm lining it with parchment again, but it says to use a tablespoon of your butter and grease the inside, which is, I think, a smart idea because as you saw, the one I made yesterday stuck to the parchment. So I don't have, I'm not going to use the butter. I'm going to use some of this avocado oil cooking spray instead, and I'm going to use 1 less tablespoon of this in our actual recipe. Luckily for me, this already has the 3/4 cup marked right there, so I'm going to use 1 tablespoon less than that. I'm going to go ahead and cut it and put the rest away because we're not going to use it. Now this is going to look very similar to what we did yesterday. So all of our ingredients, or most of them anyways, are going to end up in a saucepan. I'm using the same one from yesterday because I'm thinking that since I'm using the marshmallow cream this time, it shouldn't puff up like it did yesterday. So in this saucepan, we're going to put the remaining butter. So the 3/4 cup of butter minus the tablespoon that you presumably used to grease your baking dish. Kiddos in the background, by the way, where this is a real life family, real life kitchen. This is not a set, so you're hearing real life going on in the background as I attempt this recipe again. So the butter's in the saucepan. I've got this on medium heat, and to the butter, I'm gonna add our sugars. So that was 2 cups of white sugar. And I had to take out both containers because I don't think I have enough in the first. So that's not even a whole cup. Uh-oh, I might not have 2 entire cups. Wasn't planning to make this recipe twice, guys. And I don't typically keep sugar in the house unless it's for a specific reason. So that's just barely 2 cups of sugar. And we need 3/4 of a cup of packed brown sugar. We need our 2/3 of a cup of milk. Remember, this is meant to be evaporated dairy milk, but we're doing non-dairy, so I'm going to be using What I typically use is a milk substitute and hoping for the best. That's 2/3 of a cup of that. We're gonna put in our cinnamon. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. It's probably more than I needed, but that's fine. I like heavy flavors. And our pumpkin pie spice. And lastly, we need our 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree. So now we're meant to bring this to a boil over medium heat. That's something else to consider, is that the recipe yesterday did not have specific temperatures or times for anything. So it's possible that I brought it up to the softball stage too quickly, and I don't know if maybe that affected the end texture, or the texture of the end result, I should say. So I am just going to melt all of this together, stirring constantly as the recipe says. We have our candy thermometer. I feel like this is such a guerrilla production because I usually cut out my moving the camera around and whatnot, but desperate times, man. So we've got our candy thermometer back in action, and this once again says to cook and stir until a candy thermometer reads 238. So yesterday it said to look for 235. Now it's saying to look for 238 in this recipe. Honestly, I'm looking for right about here. Whenever it gets to right about here, I think that that's gonna be it, because it's not very specific, this candy thermometer. And yesterday at least it got very steamy, so it was hard for me to look at the numbers with any detail anyways. Once this comes to a boil, I'm meant to turn the heat down to low and then just keep stirring until our 238 degrees Fahrenheit is reached. So since we've achieved boilage, I've gone ahead and turned the temp down to medium-low, but veering more on the side of low. And I'm a little confused as to how this is meant to continue to climb in temperature, even with the stove temperature turned down. Like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But this is why I don't typically make candies or confections, because like most desserts and baking and whatnot, this is a science. You have to be extremely precise. And I quite literally do not know what I'm doing. So I'm just going to trust the recipe, even though yesterday's recipe failed me. And I'm going to hope that the science wins all. So we're 15 minutes in, and I don't know how well you guys can see the thermometer there, but we're at somewhere between 212, we're between 200 and 225. Kind of inching closer to the 225. That being said, I turned the heat back up, so it's still medium low, but now it's closer to medium than low, because we were just at a standstill for about 10 minutes. Nothing was going on. So I'm gonna give it another 5 minutes or so, and if we're still at the same temperature, then I might raise the temperature of the stove again slightly. This is definitely thickening. But as somebody that does not make candy, I honestly don't know what it's supposed to look like at the softball stage. Softball stage basically means that you can put it into a glass of water and it will clump up into a soft ball. But I am not going to do that. Messing around with molten sugar terrifies me. So I really am just relying on the thermometer. And like I said, the thermometer really is just so barely inching towards its goal that I don't know if I'm going to need to make some adjustments soon. Alright friends, an update. I am just now going over 225 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember, the recipe said we're looking for 238. The only reason I've been able to get up to 225 is because I now have this going at medium-high. Granted, just over medium, but still, it's over medium, so let's call it medium-high. There was no way that this was going to get to 238 on low. And the reason that I say that with confidence is because it took 10 minutes of me just sitting there staring at it and seeing no movement, but also this recipe says that we should have been finished with all of this and pouring the mixture into our pan within 25 minutes. I've been at this for 40 and we've still not reached temperature. So So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave it at this temperature because I don't want it to burn. I'm already stirring constantly to try to keep anything from sticking to the bottom or burning. I'm gonna give it another couple minutes here because like I said, I've been at this for a really long time and I don't want this to burn. But in a couple minutes, regardless of what temperature it's at, it's still holding at just over 225. I'm gonna pull it off the heat and proceed with the recipe as it's written. So if this doesn't work either, we will never know if it's because the recipe was wrong, if it's because of my dairy-free adjustments, or if it's just because I don't know how to make candy and I rushed the process. But that's what's going on. That's just what it is. So just letting you guys know where we're at this point. Alright, so our temperature refused to budge past the 225-ish mark. So I've gone ahead and taken this off the heat. This is what it looks like. It smells glorious. And it's definitely like a thick, ribbony type sauce. When I do this to the bottom of the pan, it does leave a slight like trail. So it definitely thickened. Is it where we need it to be? I honestly don't know, but we're proceeding regardless because something's already off, right? Something's already not going the way it's meant to because this should have been done in half the time. So I'm going to go ahead and pour in our teaspoon of vanilla. I'm eyeballing it, of course, but I think that was pretty close. We're going to put in our entire bag of chocolate chips because we needed 10 ounces and that's exactly what's in the bag. And lastly, we're going to go in with our entire 7 ounces of marshmallow cream, which conveniently is exactly what's in the jar. So that's all going into our super hot pumpkin cinnamon sort of caramel mixture that we've got going here. And we're just going to stir it until it's all combined. And once this is combined, we're going to pour it into our greased, parchment-lined 13x9 glass dish. The recipe says to then chill it until it's completely cool and firm, which according to the recipe should take about an hour and a half. So I'm intending to follow those directions exactly. I'm going to stick it in the fridge. Remember yesterday's recipe, I let it cool on the counter for 3 hours, and then I let it cool in the fridge for another 3 hours. So we're not doing that today. Today we're going directly into the refrigerator as per the recipe. I'm going to give it its hour and a half, and we'll check on it at that point. Hopefully it's chilled and firmed and ready to cut by then, and if it's not, we'll give it more time, but I will let you all know either way. So we don't have a pumpkin spice color really. It's definitely more of a chocolate color because of the chocolate chips I had to use, but it's still going to have all the cinnamon, pumpkin spice, and pumpkin flavors in here. So color notwithstanding, hopefully this is still a success. Okay, it's been an hour and a half. This already looks way more promising than yesterday's recipe because, let me pick you guys up and show you here. You can see that it's actually separating from the parchment. So it's solid enough that it's pulling away and like it's its own entity. It's not just being a giant goop on the paper. That's already way more promising than yesterday. So I'm going to go ahead and cut right here. I'm going to make little incision. This feels firmer than like a pudding, but not quite as firm as fudge in my estimation. So it might need, actually, yeah, this feels like it needs more time in the fridge. It is sliceable and it does lift away. So it's already, like I said, way better than yesterday's, but not quite like a solid fudge texture yet. I don't know if it needs more time cooling or if this is just what we're gonna get, but let's do a taste test all the same. Certainly way too soft to be called fudge, but the taste is amazing. You get the pumpkin, you get the cinnamon and the pumpkin spice, you get a little touch of chocolate. In the traditional recipe, you're not going to get as much of a chocolate flavor because you'd be using white chocolate, so the cocoa would be completely omitted, but it's delicious just as is. So the only thing missing for me to call this an absolute success right now is the texture. I'm gonna put it away for another hour or so and see if I can't get it to firm up a little more. Okay, it's a full hour later and this is looking promising because I just tried to turn it out and it actually completely came off the paper like with ease. So I'm going to do a little slice-a-rooney here, and that looks perfect actually. So that, I dare say, is a piece of fudge. We managed to make dairy-free fudge, and more importantly, we managed to make pumpkin fudge, which is what we set out to do in order to recreate the Disney recipe. So I now feel confident in saying that this second time around was definitely a success. As long as you're able to get your white chocolate chips, there's no reason why you can't also make some Disneyland pumpkin fudge right in your own home. So we did it, friends. We managed it. We made it happen. I'm glad that we persevered and we stuck it out because this is delicious. This is bomb. Anytime anybody ever wants me to bring a candy to a get together, this is gonna be my go-to recipe because it was just so good. It took a while, took a little longer than I expected, but in the end, it set up beautifully. It tastes incredible, and the longer it sits in the fridge, the better it is. So you can make it even a couple days in advance, and that way the day of your celebration, there's that much less that you need to worry about. If there's a particular Disney recipe that you'd like to see me try to adapt to make it more allergy friendly, let me know your suggestions in the comments. I'm always excited to see those. And before you go, make sure you check out that playlist because there's way more apple and pumpkin treats waiting for you to discover. I want to thank you so much for being here and watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, I hope that you will please give it a big thumbs up. I'd also love it if you would subscribe and click that notification bell because I post at least 3 times a week and I wouldn't want you to miss a minute. Thanks so much again for watching. See you real soon.